Hey everyone, it's Catan. I recently played in a Catan National Qualifier tournament and I was able to win, so I've booked my ticket to Nationals. In this video, we're going to be reviewing games 1 and 2 of that tournament to see how we did. So, let's get started. Catan National Qualifier, Game 1. This is the Game 1 board for the Catan Qualifier. I'm in the third position here. I'm playing white. And this was a pretty interesting game in that I was playing against inexperienced players. All three of them were inexperienced. They had maybe played a dozen games each. That happens sometimes in tournaments, right? You're going to get a mix of people. Some people who are looking to go to the national championships, other people who saw that there was a local tournament at their local game store and decided, hey, let me go test my luck. So, in that sense, I kind of lucked out here. And that really kind of reflects on how this game played out. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this game, but let's just look at this board real quick. Obviously, what I'm looking at is this 8, 4, 10, 5, 9, 10 area. But in the third position, under normal circumstances, it's pretty unlikely I would be able to get one of those spots. The other thing that kind of catches my eye here is that there's a decent amount of wood on this board, 15 pips. And so that wood port's looking pretty juicy. Also, just looking at the board, there's only 6 pips of ore. So getting ore is pretty critical in one of the first two positions if you're going to go for an ore wheat cheap game or cities in general. So believe it or not, these are the settlement placements for game 1. So you'll see here, I somehow managed to get the 8-4-10 and the 5-10-9. In fact, I was so confident I was actually going to get one of those two spots after the first two picks that I wound up actually taking the 5-9-10 first, kind of thinking I should be able to get the 8-4-10 on the way back just based on how the first two players had picked. And sure enough, that occurred. And really, at that point, it's pretty much game over from the start, right? I've got the wheat port down there on the bottom. I've got the best ore production, best wheat production, excellent sheep and brick. I've got 22 production. Compare that with my opponents who have 18, 15, and 18. This game was pretty much over based on the starting settlement locations alone. So not surprisingly, we won this game 11-4 to 4-3. I intentionally tried to finish with 11 points to see if I could get an extra point for the rankings, but turns out the qualifier only lets you get to 10 points max, so that's okay. But this was a fun game. Even though it was easy, the people were lovely. Even though they were inexperienced, they were really lovely, fun people. So it was fun in that sense. Got the army in the road here, and we just dominated through this corridor that we had built to our wheat port. So we won our game here with ore and wheat, and this gave me a lot of confidence for the next games and really kind of relaxed me going into game 2, which was much more interesting. So that was game 1. Before we get to game 2, if you're new to the channel, I'm Catan. I make daily Catan content on regular Catan, seafares, and cities and nights. I also make special content from time to time like this video. So if you're new, do please consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. Let's review the second game of our Catan National Qualifier. Here's the board of our second game. I'm in the third position here, playing as blue. Our opponents, we had two relatively inexperienced players again, slightly more experienced than the previous game that I played. And also, Brian, Kelly C., the Catan commentator, who is quite prominent on the Catan Discord scene, and he has his own Twitch channel, which you can go find in the description of this video. Go check out Brian, he makes good stuff. So looking at this board, a couple of things to just note right off the bat. Again, like the first map, there's no ore on this board. There's literally this 5 ore. That's really the main source of ore here. The other really prominent feature is that there are 18 pips of sheep, which makes that sheep port play pretty juicy. So picking first, red picks the 9-4-6 spot, pointing to the left to the wheat port. Pretty interesting pick. Honestly, I was pretty surprised, but I can see the utility in it going for the wheat port. But I just think with this 5 ore here, you have to take this 5-9-10. So I'm pretty sure Brian's eyes lit up when he saw that. The other thing I think that's a problem with this pick is because they're picking last, 8th, I just don't think there's going to be any wood or brick available for them, let alone ore. So Pretty tough position, but it could work depending on the picks that come after. With the second pick, Brian takes the 5, 9, 10, pointing to the left to the OR port. In my opinion, this should have been the first pick, so I'm sure Brian absolutely loved that he was able to get this in the second position. With the third pick, I take the 8, 4, 3 and point up to the sheep port. I think this is a pretty nice, solid pick. Gives me access to the sheep port and basically takes that away from the other players. It also wipes out the 8 wheat unless you go on the 10-8, which is pretty good too. So I have the best wheat locked up. The other thing it does is it secures me the sheep port pretty much unanimously. So with my second pick, there's not a bad chance I could get the 6, 5, 9 sheep. Maybe even get the 6, 5, 11 sheep if that doesn't work. There's a lot of options for me. So very happy with this pick. The yellow player in the fourth position takes the 8, 5, 10 and points to the left. Overall, I think this is a great pick. However, I think they probably should have taken it with their second pick because then they could have secured the road. The other thing I think was a little curious about it is that it didn't point to the right. I think that's better because then you can get that brick port and really make use of that 8 brick. So now let's talk about yellow's second pick. So I totally expected yellow to take the 8, 4, 3, point to the left. That way they get a great expansion spot on the 6, 3. On their original pick, the 8, 5, 10, they could also go to the right, get the 9, 10, get to the brick port. With this setup, you have all 5 resources, 22 production, a pretty obvious longest road play. Not to mention, you're in pretty decent shape to get some cities or cards with that 3 and the brick port. That's a pretty tremendous setup. But what do they do instead? Nope, they take the 6, 9, 5 sheep spot pointing to the right. What a disaster that is for me. My goodness, I was totally expecting one of these 2 hex sheep spots to be available. They're gone now. But I really don't think this is a great pick for yellow for a couple of reasons. Yes, it hurts me, but now they're living on 3 resources, right? Wood, brick, sheep. Their whole hand is now all sheep, 3 sheep. There is no port in sight. They could maybe eventually get to that 3 for 1 port by the 12. They're going to be in a tough spot. Like, looking at the position, even though they have, 5 pips of production, which is great, this doesn't look like a winning position because they've got 3 resources and they can't do much with what they've got. And it puts me in a big bind. So let's see what I decide to do. So with my hope of a double sheep spot squandered, I take the 3, 11, 6 and point down. Maybe not the best pick, but I think it has some advantages. 1, it gets me a starter road. 2, it gets me some sheep, which will actually make that sheep port pretty functional, since that's basically my whole game. The other thing it does, because it's pointing down, it points to this 11, 4, 5, which I think is actually going to be an open expansion spot. Brian in the second position should take the 8, 4, 3 because it gets him everything he needs with the exception of the sheep. But he's got that 6 sheep right next to it, which I think makes more sense. Or he could even fight up to the 11, 4, 5. I just think that's a more functional spot for Brian, so I don't think he takes that. And the red player, I don't think the red player takes the 11, 4, 5 because there's no brick, there's no ore, which they're going to have a tough time taking anyway. But if you're going to go commit to the wheat port, you might as well get some stronger wheat elsewhere, like the 8, 10. So overall, it's risky, but if it works out, I'll be able to get my double sheep and maybe have a chance this game. Brian, with his second pick, takes the 8, 4, 3 and points to the left. I think this is the right pick. I think both of his picks have been the right picks given the board circumstances. Honestly, I think he probably had the easiest time of all the players here. He gets that 6-3 expansion spot, which is excellent. Brian's in pretty good shape. Red, with their second pick, takes the 6, 11, 12. Wow. So I luck out here in that I predicted correctly that he wouldn't take the 11, 5, 4. I think the correct pick here was actually the 8, 10 wheat wood at the top here, because that way you could point to the left, potentially get some ore. The big problem with this pick for red is that now he's got a ton of sheep, a ton of wheat, and nothing else. Yeah, he gets the one order start, but a two resource setup for a relatively new player is going to be pretty impossible to overcome. So, how does this game play out? Well, yellow eventually does get to their 3-for-1 port, but by then it's way too late. They're not a factor in this game at all. Same thing with red. Red does get to their wheat port, but again, it's too little too late. This game really comes down to between myself and Brian. Brian has a really hot start. He gets two cities pretty early on, but thankfully he gets slowed down a little bit. I solo block him a few times on the 5, and I also hit his 9 wheat on a couple of occasions. And while he's buying devs, critically, he's not able to get a third knight, which is really critical. On my end, I am able to get to this 11-5-4 expansion spot very quickly, followed by getting to the sheep port very quickly. Critically, I'm also able to get a city on the 6-11-3, which I really needed. And once I got the city, I'm able to get some devs. I'm able to get that one extra knight over Brian, and I'm able to pull off the win here, 10-8, 4-4. So it was a really good win. I was able to get the army and the road. That 3 hit a few times late along with the 11, which wound up getting me the road, which was great. It was an interesting game because honestly, about halfway through, I was pretty convinced Brian was going to win this one. And I think if you look at our starting setups, and if you play this game out 100 times, Brian probably wins this 65% of the time, if not more. I got a little lucky in terms that he didn't get that knight. 2, I was able to table talk the players relatively well into targeting Brian, or at least not soloing me in most occasions. And 3, when the players did target me, for whatever reason, they tended to target my 11 wood more than anything else. Probably because I shared the 6 and the 4 with my 2 other less advanced opponents. So overall, it worked out pretty well. Really happy with this win. It's a kind of a tough loss for Brian there. Honestly, with the way he played, I don't know how much I would have done differently. I agree with all of his settled placements. Maybe I would have gone for the 6-3 sheep first. He went for the 5-2 warport first. That might have been the only thing I did differently. Otherwise, a lot of this comes down, in this case, I think, to luck and a couple of strategic blocks. Stay tuned for a complete recap of Game 3 and the full video of the final table coming up soon. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Check out some of my other videos.